Welcome back to Future Forward. I'm Teresa Spangler, and today we have another repeat guest, which I'm thrilled to have with all her insights to share about the back half of the year and going into 2024. Teresa Sande, author of Find Your Fierce. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Yes. And we're going to talk immediately. We're going to go right into this, Teresa. I want your crystal ball. You had so much insight when we talked before, looking at the back half of the year, and we're still sort of in this uncertainty time. What three things do you see that people can kind of focus their attention on to help them prepare to go into 2024? Maybe share some of those things, and then we'll just kick off right there and talk about those.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would just say thanks for having me back. I agree. Our last conversation was lots of energy, lots of ideas. And so it was just really fun. So I'm grateful to have a chance to come back and chat a bit more.
Me too.
So three things. Well, I love this concept of a crystal ball. I wish I had one. All I had was a
I know,
magic
right?
8 ball at one time that never really served me well. But I would say three main principles or things that people could use to really think about how do they set themselves up in this, we are in times of uncertainty. We've been
Yeah.
in times of uncertainty for quite some time now.
Yeah.
I would say number one is going back to the basics. So sort of understanding, if there's leaders that are listening, or parents, or, best friends, whoever's listening, right? We have gotten to a point in our life by being relatively successful, by knowing the principles of how to be an adult, right? I
Yeah.
mean, those are things like, listen to people, have as clear of communication as you can, check in on people, see
Right.
what they need, see how they're doing, don't make assumptions, right? Like all of these
The
things that we've kind of
compassion.
grown up. Yeah,
Yeah.
compassion, exactly. And we know this, but what I will say is in
Mhm.
times of uncertainty, or especially over the last couple of years with
Yeah.
COVID and new ways of working, and people are remote and now they're trying to come back to the office, there's a lot of confusion about how to lead during these uncertain times. And what I would say is it looks a little different, but what we've got to go back and lean on is the strong foundation, the principles, the basics of human interaction. So that's the first thing I would say is
Yeah.
give yourself some credit. You probably know a lot already. You know what to do. It's just kind of going back into that and regrounding ourselves on the basics.
Which
Um, yeah,
somehow feels sometimes uncomfortable because so much is changing and shifting. If I could say anything, uncertainty is going to stay with us for a long time.
absolutely. Absolutely. There's all kinds of cliche sayings like change is the new constant. Um, but at the same time, yes, like there is no crystal ball.
Yeah.
Uncertainty is here to stay.
Yeah.
And in some ways, another way to reframe that is to understand that when we're uncomfortable, that means that we're growing. That means that we're stretching. That means that
Good
we are
point.
actually leaning into a new way of being. And when we resist it so hard, that's when it gets even more and more uncomfortable versus sort of
Yeah.
leaning into it and saying, okay, what can I learn here?
Yeah.
And that's where growth mindset, the work from Carol Dweck and others comes into play, is if we can embrace this concept of I haven't learned how to do that yet, or I know the basics and now I have to brush up my skills in these areas, versus I don't like that things are changing. I don't like that things are uncertain and I don't know how to do something. That's going to keep us stuck.
Excellent point.
So,
Excellent point.
kind of getting into that. I think that the second thing that I would say is there is this concept of the golden rule, right? We've all heard about if we just practice the golden rule, everyone would do better. And of course, the golden rule is treat others the way you would like to be treated. And the challenge with that is I'm running around treating everyone the way I want things to go, the way I want to be treated. And so if we're really trying to have compassion and help people through times of uncertainty, we have to practice the platinum rule, which is to understand, treat others how they would like to be treated. What is it that they need right now?
Yeah.
And I often work with leaders and people that say, well, how could I possibly know what everybody else wants?
Yeah.
But it comes from just a genuine curiosity
Yeah.
you know, a listening to listen, not a listening to respond or to have a rebuttal. And so it is, number two kind of goes back to number one, which is practicing the basics. Are we really being with each other? Are we really listening? Are we really thinking and pausing before we knee jerk
Right.
respond to try to control this uncertainty?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the third thing I would say is another theme around compassion, but this is self-compassion. And, you know, in my book, Find Your Fierce, I talk about self-compassion and the misnomer that self-compassion isn't going to the spa or, you know, sitting around eating bonbons. It can be, right? That can be a form of self-compassion, but self-compassion is really about learning resilience
Yeah.
and giving yourself time to breathe. It's
Is that
time to
also maybe calming the voices in your head and being kinder to yourself?
absolutely, absolutely. You know, I think so many people have a hard time with the concept of self-compassion because it seems self-indulgent,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
you know, fluffy,
Yeah.
like frilly. But the reality of it is it's like that saying, you know, put on your own oxygen mask before helping others. You have to tap into your own resilience and
Right.
feed yourself, you know, give yourself the time, the space, the energy, the calm, so that
Right.
you can show up and you can practice compassion and the platinum rule with others, and you can go back to the basics and actually be effective. So I'd say those are my three things: go back to the basics, you know, platinum rule,
Yeah.
and resilience or self-compassion.
So what do you think that leaders in the organization can do? Because those are great for, personally, these are great tactics, but it's also good for the leaders inside the organization to help, execute on that, how hard to encourage it. So what tips would you give or strategies could you give leaders in the organization to help their people become more compassionate about themselves or to tackle those three things? Did they put it
Yeah.
on the elevator? A sign in the
posters,
elevator.
posters, posters everywhere, Teresa.
Yeah.
No. No, I mean, leaders are people too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good point.
And so, you know,
Yeah.
and these last couple of years, I will say, has been a particular burden on leaders because they are trying to figure this out for their teams,
Stressful.
for their organizations. But then, you know, they go home and they've got families. They look
Right.
in the mirror, they're a person as well. They're tired, burned out. So this uncertainty and unprecedented times, you know, as we've experienced,
Yeah.
is truly, you know, impacting everyone
Right.
from the top of the house, you know, on down. Um, but I think it's really similar kinds of tips. So, you know, if I'm a leader, um, no, I don't think it's about posters on the wall because, you know, nothing worse than a poster on the wall that's just nice and shiny but we don't
And
actually
nobody
live.
remembers anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, nobody remembers it, nobody lives by it. You kind of pass it and it just becomes wallpaper. I think it's about building it into our daily practices. And so, you know, if I'm a leader and I have a standing weekly team meeting, you know, it could be that you start each meeting with some kind of an exercise. And I don't mean, again, right, we all have kind of different responses when we say icebreakers or, you know, those sorts of things. It doesn't have to be soft and frilly. It has to be human. It
Sure.
just has to be checking in on people. It could be, how was the weekend? It could be, you know, you know, one-on-one. I remember somebody telling me that they were, you know, their child had a dance recital or they were staining their deck this weekend. How did it go? You
Yeah.
know, I mean, it's not just how was your weekend? It's remembering something about what someone was doing.
Yeah.
Now, I also fully recognize that managers and leaders have huge spans of control now. Organizations, in an attempt to become more efficient, have given people behemoth teams. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm an executive coach, and I was working with someone the other day that has 18 direct reports.
Oh my goodness.
And
That's
those 18
unprecedented.
people, it
Wow.
is, and those 18 people all have teams.
Wow.
And he just said to me, how could I possibly know
Yeah.
what all 18 are doing at any given time? And you know, in that moment, it was a pause and acknowledge that he can't. He's not a superhuman.
Yeah.
And that probably isn't setting him up for success.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, what are the things that we can put in place to at least support him on his desire to connect with his team that happens to be 18 people. So what he's doing is he has a OneNote, they use the different suite of tools in Outlook, and he's using OneNotes. And so when he gets on a meeting with people, he's got the little OneNote open, and he just kind of at the top, he's got some nuggets about the person, things they've told him, either things, and not superficial. Like, he was using the example of one person really appreciates doing one-on-ones in person whenever possible. So he carves out the time to try to reserve one-on-one time for her in person. Someone else really likes one-on-ones virtual because they can have all their notes up, and they can, so he's flexing his style when he can. He can't always, but when he can, to, again, treat others the way they want to be treated. So I think that's a big part of it. But, I'll go back to the resilience and self-compassion. I mean, no leader is going to be able to find the space to do this for their teams or anyone else if they can't find those couple of minutes in the morning over coffee, or, ending a meeting 5 minutes early so they have time to take a bio break, right? I mean, like, we have to take care of ourselves.
So that discipline to self is really critical.
It's the key. I mean, it's at the core. You can't do it for someone else,
right,
if you're not doing it for yourself.
So as you work with lots of different organizations, are there some trends that you're seeing that kind of maybe take us into 2024, where maybe the C-suite or executives are focusing most on, so we're more aware about what those trends look like?
Yeah, I mean, I would say most organizations, not all, but most organizations right now are still coming up the back end of COVID. So they still haven't quite figured out what's the right number of days in the office. Are we in the office? Do we need to have our cameras on during meetings, right? There's still messiness. And I think that's going to continue, for a bit. The other thing that a lot of organizations have experienced is this downturn economically. So, the belt was tightened. And that's a hard thing to layer on top of uncertainty, on top of disruption in the organization, is to have economic pressures. And, I think that's going to continue through the end of the year. And even as things start to get better, or maybe loosen up a little bit as we go into the early part of 2024, there's a long tail on these things. So we don't snap our fingers and it just changes overnight. So I do think that it's probably going to be 3 to 4 quarters before it really feels different. So, I mean, it could be a year from now before you and I sit back down and we go, wow, it feels demonstrably different than it did in summer of 2023. But what we have to acknowledge and pay attention for are the signposts that things are changing. Because all of a sudden there'll be a new normal. And the new normal usually sneaks up on us. It doesn't happen overnight the way maybe COVID did, right? But I do think we have to remember that new forms of normal are taking shape now. And there's even signposts.
That goes to future, when you're doing sort of futures thinking is all about collecting those insights and early sort of trends that you can see, to collect them and put them in a little bucket that you can build scenarios around, because that helps you prepare for those things. Do you see companies actually starting to do that, or is it still going to sneak up on us?
No, I do see organizations doing that. And not surprisingly, the organizations that are, I'm going to say, going back to the basics, listening, checking in, what do employees need most? And it's not, I sometimes have leaders say, well, we can't do everything for everyone. I mean, one person wants one thing, somebody else wants something different. We can't be all things to all people. 100%. I agree with that. It really is about clarity and consistency. So once you land on, whether it's we come into the office 3 days a week and here's why, and here's how it maps to our culture, if you can explain that clearly and consistently to your employees.
Aren't you saying somehow too that we value you, and so your value on these days is going to add to the whole team and the mission of the company? So
I think you're only saying that if you're saying that.
Well, yeah.
Right. And so again, going back to the basics, I think we're missing opportunities
Yeah,
to connect dots for employees to say, we want you in the office 3 days a week because
right.
we value you and because we have observed what happens when we're together in a conference room
Yeah,
looking across the table at each other. Now, I do think that organizations have also found through being remote and other things that we're really, really effective being remote.
yeah,
And I think it's okay for an organization to acknowledge that and say, I still value you.
yeah,
And so to value you in a remote or a hybrid environment, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. We've forgotten to communicate. We've forgotten to explain and connect the dots as to why we're doing something. And it's not because leaders owe someone an explanation. It's because as adults, we all get engaged when we have information. And when we don't have information, we make it up.
yeah,
And that's the biggest gap is if we can't help people understand we're doing this for this reason, it helps you in these ways, it helps the business in these ways, we expect these results. Are you on board? You know, employees can't really make an educated decision to be engaged.
right. Yeah,
We need to give people the opportunity to understand. And will they vote with their feet? Yes. We saw that through COVID too, right? People
yeah,
are going to now more than ever, if the culture isn't working for them, they will go find another opportunity. But isn't that okay as well?
yeah,
We want to make sure that it's a place people want to be, that they see themselves and they can thrive and they can grow. We want to be open about this culture. We do come into the office X days a week, and here's why. And
yeah,
if I'm sitting there evaluating the company and I say, I don't want to do that, then let me go someplace else. Let someone who wants to be in the office 3 days a week. Now, I know that sounds so perfect and Pollyanna, and we can't afford droves of people leaving, and it's expensive to recruit and hire. I get all of that, but it really is about a future vision,
yeah,
not this kind of short-term pain that we experience.
right.
It's about holding, and I think this is the work you do so well, Teresa, like holding that future vision of if you want something 12 months from now, 18 months from now, 24 months from now, you have to start now.
Yeah,
You have to have a plan,
yeah.
and then you have to work that plan.
And that actually just takes me into 2024, even though it's still kind of a short window. What I really want to encourage is, and I've seen it so many times, is that the rebounds, when they happen, catch many by surprise. And it goes back
Sure.
to what you were saying. So this preparation, all the things you're talking about, the self-care, it's really important also the planning and thinking about the growth side of 2024. It will happen. It's cyclical. We don't know exactly when. So let's say it's early 2024. What are we doing? How are we planning for this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's
My consultancy is a talent consultancy, and I work with organizations on, are we structured correctly? Do we have the right talent? Who's in your pipeline? What are we doing to get them ready? I mean, so often I'll work with a company that they do their succession planning
yeah,
and they have a lovely sheet of paper that says where everyone should be a year or two from now. But then when the time comes, they're not filling from that succession plan.
right.
They're knee-jerk reacting
Yeah.
to an event or to something happening.
Very good
And
point.
so what I do is I go in and I build with the company their talent strategy that future proofs their organization tied to their business strategy.
Right.
So I always say if you don't like something about the picture of your talent today, the strength, the makeup of it, the diversity of it, the readiness of it, fill in the blank. If you don't like it today, we needed to start doing something about that 18 months ago.
Yeah, it's very good point. Yeah.
So the good news is,
Yeah.
right, 18 months, here's the thing about time, it doesn't stop.
Yeah.
So 18 months from now is going to come.
Well, so let's put that in context
Start
with
now.
AI and what's going to happen in AI next year. I can't say that companies aren't doing things, but what I see is that it's more reactive. It's like, okay, you're using the tools and we're putting some rules in on how you use the tools, but we're not really planning ahead for what's AI going to do to impact our business strategy? What do our people need to know about all these integrated technologies that are going to be driven around that? And when we're doing innovation projects, I mean, we're trying to mentor that thinking and that planning in, but it would be great to have that as forethought. So sometimes it's just too much of an afterthought.
Yeah. It is an afterthought. And just like anything with technologies, you've got your early adopters. It's like a bell curve. Early
Yeah.
adopters, the bulk, and then you've got the really late
Yeah.
stragglers, right? I mean, so yeah, we're going to see that whether it's with AI. I mean, that's going to continue because I think that's actually
Well,
human
I think it's
nature.
the gap in the workforce skills is more what I'm talking about, right?
Mm,
So how do you plan? And that's where we see the real mentorship, because I think there are things happening, but maybe not to the immersiveness that it could to help you be prepared for this sort of onslaught of things that are going to change dramatically.
they are. What I would say though is from a talent strategy
Yeah.
perspective, there's a statistic out recently that says that it's like 70 or 72% of the jobs that people will hold 5 years from now don't exist today.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Meaning, like
Yes.
some variation of it might exist, but the impact of technology, the way in which people get results, the way in which we work is going to be so drastically different 5 years from now. And
Right.
so, people who are graduating college, the jobs that they're going to hold in 5 years don't yet exist.
Yes.
So the reason I call that out is you mentioned, mentorship and how we're preparing people. I think that is a significant difference
Okay.
because we used to prepare people by saying, well, who has the most knowledge in the company? Who's the
Yeah.
most senior? And can they mentor the next generation of people? And that's important. Mentorship, very, very important. But what we have to be open to and remember is that they are mentoring on what they know and what they've done, which
Yes.
is somewhat backwards looking. And that's valuable. We
If
have to honor the history of our organizations and we have to understand mistakes and learnings so
Yeah.
that we can apply them for whatever the future curveball is that's coming. However, it's not enough,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Because the knowledge, what we do know is that the knowledge we have within our organizations today is not the only knowledge we need for
Right.
5 years from now.
Right. Right.
And so
Yeah.
that
I bring
skill
up
doesn't exist.
No, I agree. And I bring up the importance again. I know I hate to harp on it, but futures thinking, if you're working with people that are in that futures thinking world, and we've worked with a lot of different companies in that realm, and we're not a crystal ball holder either. We can't predict, but
Right.
we have enough of a maybe savvy to help mentor some skills that are going to be needed. So I just think, it just begs to think you don't need, it might not be just one type of mentor. It might be different
Oh,
ways that you're using contractors or consultants, and build in a mentorship in the agreement with those people. Don't just say, deliver this hard thing. Let's build in something that's transferring that knowledge and helping futures think. Anyway, that's my point.
I love it. I love it. And I agree with you. I think there was a time when organizations would hire consultants
Yeah.
because they either had a gap in their talent or they needed to fix something. And
Right.
I really do see another trend that I see is organizations that are more future forward, more thinking out into scenarios and what might be coming. They're partnering with consultants to supplement knowledge,
Yes.
not just because, ooh, I have a gap and we got to get something done by December. It's like,
Yeah.
let's bring in some different thinking for a period of time
Right.
so that it
Right.
complements the internal thinking and we come up with some really great scenarios. And the other thing, I mean, again, it goes back to this resilience and kind of being ready for the future. And even what I said before about growth mindset,
Yeah.
even organizations that are mapping scenarios and mapping, these are the 3 to 5 possible things that are going to happen in the next 3 years for our company. You have to have a growth mindset to know that you might love scenario number 2 and that one might not play out. And
Yeah.
we have to be open and understanding of how to make all of them successful if and when the time comes. That's what makes scenario planning work
Yeah.
when it's time to pick a scenario and run with it so that you're actually ahead of the curve and not reacting.
That's awesome. Good feedback. And so I want to ask this, because I've read a couple of different reports on the DEI initiative. So diversity and equity and women, growth and just, just the whole diversity initiatives, are they still strong? Have companies had to back off of them? It's gotten quiet. So I just wonder what you're seeing there.
Big question. I
Too
don't
big?
think companies, not too big. And actually it's one of those ones that I think we're going to be talking about for a really long time because it's not simple.
Yeah.
It's just not simple.
Yeah.
But I don't see organizations backing off of it. What I am seeing is a trend I don't love, which is why it might feel like we're backing off of it is a lot of organizations. Let's take a women's network, for example. I will regularly, about once a week, I'll get an email from someone in a women's network. Hi, I'm running the women's network at XYZ company. And we would like to bring in a guest speaker to talk to our network.
Yeah.
And we'll get talking about what they want to solve. And they'll say, well, we got together and we thought this would be a really helpful topic. And then they'll say, we don't have a really big budget. We just have a little sponsorship that's been set aside. And then we'll start planning the event and they'll say, well, I don't know for sure if this will work because I got to check if the leader is available and if they're traveling. And we'd really like to have a sponsor show up for the breakfast. So what I'm getting at is a women's network is run by the women in the organization and they're sort of bootstrapping it together. They're trying to secure, beg, borrow, and steal. They're trying to get somebody to come and sponsor. So it's not that they're backing off of it. I think what has happened is figuratively speaking, organizations have put the burden on the marginalized group to support themselves. And they've done it under the cloak of empowerment.
Yeah.
Well, women must know what women need.
Yeah.
Women are not broken. Women don't need something new. What we need is organizations to embrace our differences and to empower different types of people to sit at the table equally. And that's where I feel we've taken our foot off the gas just a little bit. And the ownership is maybe not a little bit, probably a lot more than I'd like to see. And the ownership is on the leaders and the people in majority to come back to the table and say, this isn't a you thing, this is an us thing. And are we all in this together? So that's the difference that I've seen. Sure. And that's why I think maybe it feels like we've taken our foot off the gas because frankly, I just, the senior most leaders aren't talking about it as much. They're not at the table as actively. They sort of have turned it over to the employees. And that's, to me, that's taking us backwards. We're a little bit back where we started.
This is just disheartening a little bit, but at the same time, it's a history that we've watched.
And don't get me wrong. I mean, there are organizations doing amazing things. I partnered with some fantastic organizations in this last year that are just doubling down on this. And it is really, really important. And they're maybe not taking out a billboard on the interstate. They're just doing the work. Yeah. And I think that's the other reason, so it's maybe like a fork in the road, right? We're not hearing as much about it because I think the organizations that have backed off have turned the reins over. And I think that's a problem. The organizations that have doubled down are now rolling up their sleeves and it's a part of how they work.
Which is, I think, the key, right? Maybe that's why, maybe that's why it's a little more quiet and that. Because I have seen women actually get promoted and take bigger roles and, maybe it's not, and not just women, but again, the whole diversity side. And there's so much proof points that a diverse organization brings diverse thinking. So it may be if we have the hope and what you probably see it more than I do is maybe we're seeing the effects of some of that effort to actually be implemented. So there's not a need to necessarily have the conversations because it's working versus there are some that still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. And even if it's not working, I think it's the organizations that are just building it into, it's not an effort. It's not flavor of the day. It's not an event, right? Now they're doing events, but it is
Yeah,
we are going to build this into our hiring practices. We
that
are
makes
building this into the way that we promote people, the way we develop people. It's not a, like women need different secret leadership
yeah,
skills than men. I mean, they don't, right? What we need is
that's more positive.
organizations
Yeah,
that
yeah.
embrace the differences.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because talk, I mean, we've talked a lot, and maybe it's not the talk that makes it. It's like if it is part of the culture, we don't have to talk about it because it's just the action. Yeah,
Yes, but the action has to be there.
yeah, action does have to be there. Well, is
Yeah.
there any topic that we haven't covered that we let's make sure we get that out there?
You know, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I mean, I might pitch the question back to you, your listeners and
Yeah.
people that you're hearing from. Obviously you curate your podcasts to hit on some of the topics that you're hearing people want to hit on. But I mean, is there anything that's top of mind for you that you're?
No, and you mentioned that you work with lots of companies on their skill, I mean, on the talent side. I do talk
Mhm.
to more young professionals that were affected. And so the idea of the hiring back or hiring curve, are there strategies that some of these young professionals can use? Some of them not so young, some of them in their, mid to late 30s, going into 40s. So it was disruptive. But do you see some efforts of looking and planning for more hiring in the like latter part of the year, early part of 24?
I think for sure early part of 24. What's hard about end of year is most organizations that are on a fiscal calendar, even in a good year, things
Yeah,
slow down,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
You see this little burst of hiring because people have extra budget or they want to get it in before next year's budget, right? I really want to get this resource in. But I think in a down year, that belt starts tightening up even in Q3. So it doesn't mean organizations won't be hiring. Plenty are hiring. It's more that I don't know that we'll see, like a trend line
right.
until the beginning of the year. And I think that's also somewhat annually cyclical in
It
that,
is. Yeah,
during the holidays, at least US based holidays, et cetera, things start to close down November, December, and then they ramp back up. January comes and we can't hire fast enough. So I think that's going to continue. That is sort of an
yeah,
annual thing that happens. But I think we are coming out of a downturn and things will start. So I think it'll feel a bit more intense as we go into 2024.
sure.
Um, but you mentioned something about rehiring and this boomerang concept, right? There used to be a time if an organization laid you off or you quit or
Yeah,
whatever, it was like, well, I worked there once, could never go back. And this concept of organization and employees being in relationship with each other.
yeah,
And it's like you can break and then you can come back together. I see this all the time, right? Boomerang employees, maybe they were laid off and it really was because of a downturn. But if things are better, if the employee says, I love the company, and the company says, we love what you were doing, like, you know, again, it's a mindset.
I
It's a
agree.
mindset.
Is that something that you would say? And I guess there's two questions here. Would you say to that employee, go back and have the conversations and see if they're open to it, or should the company? It's probably a little bit of both, right?
It's a little bit of both. And I would say, be honest with yourself. What were the circumstances under which you left?
Yeah, yeah,
Don't put, as they say, lipstick on a pig. If it was not a good situation, it wasn't a
right.
good situation. I wouldn't waste your time or energy. I also think it's really important. So for any organizations or leaders listening, it's important how we impact people
Yeah, 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 yeah.
because the people that stay are watching how
Yes.
we exit and treat the people that are leaving. And the people that are leaving are making an assessment of, was it just a downturn and I was impacted but I would love to go back?
Mm,
Or unfortunately, a lot of times, people when they're impacted, they're like, it's the best thing that could have happened because now I see that I want to be at a different organization or one that's more aligned to my values. So I think you really, before you answer that question, you need to take a step back. Once the shock of it and the rawness of it passes a little bit, and just really evaluate, is that a place you want to be? Is that
right.
a place you could see yourself growing in the future? And if it is,
Yeah,
I don't I don't think there's anything wrong if it was on good terms to say, my work there isn't done, I'd consider going back. The other trend that I see, and this is for people that are maybe a little more farther along in their career and they make the decision to leave a traditional role and move into consulting roles, is they consult back to their old organizations. You know, many of the organizations I worked in my career are clients of mine now, and I couldn't be more thrilled to have, you know, just a new blossoming type of relationship. It's a different kind of boomerang
Yeah.
where, you know, I'm just on a different side of the table and still contributing to that organization. So I think it's, again, mindset.
Yeah.
If we're open to what the possibilities are, I just want to encourage people to really factually evaluate
Yes.
what they want for themselves
Good point.
and then go after that.
Yeah.
So
One last question to cover, because I got asked this just last week. It's like, all right, well, if hiring is slowing down, do I just take a break, or do I continue to try to build relationships and get myself ready for 2024? Any thoughts on that?
You know, there used to be a time where you couldn't have a gap in your resume, right? Oh, it was the kiss of death if you had, like, what were they doing for those 6 months or whatever? Are there still people out there that will look at a resume and say, I have a question? Sure. It's probably not the organization you want to be at if you value taking a break.
Yeah.
There is a trend in organizations that are a bit more future, you know, thinking to say, let's be real about what we've been through in the last 3 years. And there are people who took breaks, either for their own health, for the health of a family member, you know, to move across country, to do whatever we needed to do to get through this unprecedented time. That's becoming a bit of the new normal. So I do think we're on the early side of it. But I think 2 years from now, we're going to be talking about a very common, reasonable narrative of, yep, I have a 6-month gap in my resume. And during that time, I was practicing self-care and evaluating my next move. And it sounds almost foreign now, but I will tell you, the generations coming into the workforce, and we now have 5 active generations in the workforce, if you can believe that.
Yes, I can.
It is crazy. I mean, it's like nothing we've seen before. The earlier generations, it is very normal. It is very healthy. And I think that is infiltrating in a very positive way. And it's shaping the thinking of other generations in the workplace as well. And on the tail end, the later generations in the workforce, 5 generations only works if there's some level of flexibility to show up in whatever stage of life you're in. And it doesn't have to be just when you have a child or just when you are aging and semi-retired. It can be because I need a break, because my spouse or partner is taking on a new career and I'm taking a step back for a moment. It's not an indication of my commitment to my career overall. And I do think that's a trend we're going to continue to see. It's just, that's a wholesale shift, right? That's a big change.
Well, I can't thank you enough for having this discussion. I think it's such an important one. I can't wait to get it out there. So Teresa, thank you for joining Future Forward today. It's been wonderful.
My pleasure. Yes, thanks for having me. And as topics come up, if there's something people want to talk about more, I always welcome a chance to join you.
Awesome. Thank you.